Chapter 16 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Conan Doyle. Chapter 16. How the Yellow Cog fought the two rover galleys. The three vessels had been sweeping swiftly westwards, the cog still well to the front, although the galleys were slowly drawing in upon either quarter. To the left was a hard skyline, unbroken by a sail. The island already lay like a cloud behind them, while right in front was St. Alban's Head, with Portland looming mistily in the farthest distance. Alleyne stood by the tiller, looking backwards, the fresh wind full in his teeth, the crisp winter air tingling on his face and blowing his yellow curls from under his bassinet. His cheeks were flushed and his eyes shining, for the blood of 100 fighting Saxon ancestors was beginning to stir in his veins. "What was that?" he asked, as a hissing, sharp drawn voice seemed to whisper in his ear. The steersman smiled and pointed with his foot to where a short, heavy crossbow quarrel stuck quivering in the boards. At the same instant the man stumbled forward upon his knees and lay lifeless upon the deck, a blood stained feather jutting out from his back. As Alleyne stooped to raise him, the air seemed to be alive with the sharp zip zip of the bolts, and he could hear them pattering on the deck like apples at a tree shaking. "Raise 2 more mantlets by the poop lantern," said Sir Nigel quietly. "And another man to the tiller," cried the master shipman. "Keep them in play, Aylward, with 10 of your men," the knight continued, "and let 10 of Sir Oliver's bowmen do as much for the Genoese. I have no mind as yet to show them how much they have to fear from us." 10 picked shots under Aylward stood in line across the broad deck, and it was a lesson to the young squires, who had seen nothing of war, to note how orderly and how cool were these old soldiers, how quick the command and how prompt the carrying out, 10 moving like one. Their comrades crouched beneath the bulwarks with many a rough jest and many a scrap of criticism or advice. "Higher, Wat, higher! Put thy body into it, Will! Forget not the wind, Hal!" So ran the muttered chorus, while high above it rose the sharp twanging of the strings, the hiss of the shafts, and the short "Draw your arrow, nick your arrow, shoot wholly together" from the master bowman. And now both mangonels were at work from the galleys, but so covered and protected that, save at the moment of discharge, no glimpse could be caught of them. A huge brown rock from the Genoese sang over their heads and plunged sullenly into the slope of a wave. Another from the Norman whizzed into the waist, broke the back of a horse, and crashed its way through the side of the vessel. 2 others, flying together, tore a great gap in the St. Christopher upon the sail, and brushed 3 of Sir Oliver's men at arms from the forecastle. The master shipman looked at the knight with a troubled face. "They keep their distance from us," said he. "Our archery is over good, and they will not close. What defence can we make against the stones?" "I think I may trick them," the knight answered cheerfully, and passed his order to the archers. Instantly 5 of them threw up their hands and fell prostrate upon the deck. One had already been slain by a bolt, so that there were but 4 upon their feet. "That should give them heart," said Sir Nigel, eyeing the galleys, which crept along on either side with a slow measured swing of their great oars, the water swirling and foaming under their sharp stems. "They still hold aloof," cried Horton. "Then down with 2 more," shouted their leader. "That will do. Ma foi! but they come to our lure like chicks to the fowler. To your arms, men! The pennon behind me and the squires round the pennon. Stand fast with the anchors in the waist, and be ready for a cast. Now blow our trumpets, and may God's benison be with the honest men." As he spoke a roar of voices and a roll of drums came from either galley, and the water was lashed into spray by the hurried beat of 100 oars. Down they swooped, one on the right, one on the left, the sides and shrouds black with men and bristling with weapons. In heavy clusters they hung upon the forecastle, all ready for a spring, faces white, faces brown, faces yellow and faces black, fair Norsemen, swarthy Italians, fierce rovers from the Levant, and fiery Moors from the Barbary States, of all hues and countries, and marked solely by the common stamp of a wild beast ferocity. Rasping up on either side, with oars trailing to save them from snapping, they poured in a living torrent, with horrid yell and shrill whoop upon the defenceless merchantmen. But wilder yet was the cry, and shriller still the scream, when there rose up from the shadow of those silent bulwarks the long lines of English bowmen, and the arrows whizzed in a deadly sleet among the unprepared masses upon the pirate decks. From the higher sides of the cog the bowmen could shoot straight down, at a range which was so short as to enable a cloth yard shaft to pierce through mail coats, or to transfix a shield, though it were an inch thick of toughened wood. One moment Alleyne saw the galley's poop crowded with rushing figures, waving arms, exultant faces. The next it was a blood smeared shambles, with bodies piled 3 deep upon each other, the living cowering behind the dead to shelter themselves from that sudden storm blast of death. On either side the seamen whom Sir Nigel had chosen for the purpose had cast their anchors over the side of the galleys, so that the 3 vessels, locked in an iron grip, lurched heavily forward upon the swell. And now set in a fell and fierce fight, one of 1,000 of which no chronicler has spoken and no poet sung. Through all the centuries and over all those southern waters nameless men have fought in nameless places, their sole monuments a protected coast and an unravaged countryside. Fore and aft the archers had cleared the galley's decks, but from either side the rovers had poured down into the waist, where the seamen and bowmen were pushed back, and so mingled with their foes that it was impossible for their comrades above to draw string to help them. It was a wild chaos, where axe and sword rose and fell, while Englishmen, Norman, and Italians staggered and reeled on a deck which was cumbered with bodies and slippery with blood. The clang of blows, the cries of the stricken, the short deep shout of the islanders, and the fierce whoops of the rovers rose together in a deafening tumult, while the breath of the panting men went up into the wintry air like the smoke from a furnace. The giant Tete Noir, towering above his fellows and clad from head to foot in plate of proof, led on his boarders, waving a huge mace in the air, with which he struck to the deck every man who approached him. On the other side Spadebeard, a dwarf in height, but of great breadth of shoulder and length of arm, had cut a road almost to the mast, with 80 Genoese men at arms close at his heels. Between these 2 formidable assailants the seamen were being slowly wedged more closely together, until they stood back to back under the mast, with the rovers raging upon every side of them. But help was close at hand. Sir Oliver Buttesthorn with his men at arms had swarmed down from the forecastle, while Sir Nigel with his 3 squires, Black Simon, Aylward, Hordle John, and a score more, threw themselves from the poop and hurled themselves into the thickest of the fight. Alleyne, as in duty bound, kept his eyes fixed ever on his lord, and pressed forward close at his heels. Often had he heard of Sir Nigel's prowess and skill with all knightly weapons, but all the tales that had reached his ears fell far short of the real quickness and coolness of the man. It was as if the devil was in him, for he sprang here and sprang there, now thrusting and now cutting, catching blows on his shield, turning them with his blade, stooping under the swing of an axe, springing over the sweep of a sword, so swift and so erratic that the man who braced himself for a blow at him might find him 6 paces off ere he could bring it down. 3 pirates had fallen before him, and he had wounded Spadebeard in the neck, when the Norman giant sprang at him from the side with a slashing blow from his deadly mace. Sir Nigel stooped to avoid it, and at the same instant turned a thrust from the Genoese swordsman, but, his foot slipping in a pool of blood, he fell heavily to the ground. Alleyne sprang in front of the Norman, but his sword was shattered, and he himself beaten to the ground by a second blow from the ponderous weapon. Ere the pirate chief could repeat it, however, John's iron grip fell upon his wrist, and he found that for once he was in the hands of a stronger man than himself. Fiercely he strove to disengage his weapon, but Hordle John bent his arm slowly back until, with a sharp crack like a breaking stave, it turned limp in his grasp, and the mace dropped from the nerveless fingers. In vain he tried to pluck it up with the other hand. back and back still his foeman bent him, until, with a roar of pain and of fury, the giant clanged his full length upon the boards, while the glimmer of a knife before the bars of his helmet warned him that short would be his shrift if he moved. Cowed and disheartened by the loss of their leader, the Normans had given back, and were now streaming over the bulwarks on to their own galley, dropping a dozen at a time on to her deck. But the anchor still held them in its crooked claw, and Sir Oliver with 50 men was hard upon their heels. Now, too, the archers had room to draw their bows once more, and great stones from the yard of the cog came thundering and crashing among the flying rovers. Here and there they rushed with wild screams and curses, diving under the sail, crouching behind booms, huddling into corners like rabbits when the ferrets are upon them, as helpless and as hopeless. They were stern days, and if the honest soldier, too poor for a ransom, had no prospect of mercy upon the battlefield, what ruth was there for sea robbers, the enemies of humankind, taken in the very deed, with proofs of their crimes still swinging upon their yard arm? But the fight had taken a new and a strange turn upon the other side. Spadebeard and his men had given slowly back, hard pressed by Sir Nigel, Aylward, Black Simon, and the poop guard. Foot by foot the Italian had retreated, his armor running blood at every joint, his shield split, his crest shorn, his voice fallen away to a mere gasping and croaking. Yet he faced his foemen with dauntless courage, dashing in, springing back, sure footed and steady handed, with a point which seemed to menace 3 at once. Beaten back on to the deck of his own vessel, and closely followed by a dozen Englishmen, he disengaged himself from them, ran swiftly down the deck, sprang back into the cog once more, cut the rope which held the anchor, and was back in an instant among his crossbowmen. At the same time the Genoese sailors thrust with their oars against the side of the cog, and a rapidly widening rift appeared between the two vessels. "By St. George!" cried Ford, "we are cut off from Sir Nigel." "He is lost!" gasped Terlake. "Come, let us spring for it." The two youths jumped with all their strength to reach the departing galley. Ford's feet reached the edge of the bulwarks, and his hand clutching a rope, he swung himself on board. Terlake fell short, crashed in among the oars, and bounded off into the sea. Alleyne, staggering to the side, was about to hurl himself after him, but Hordle John dragged him back by the girdle. "You can scarce stand, lad, far less jump," said he. "See how the blood rips from your bassinet." "My place is by the flag," cried Alleyne, vainly struggling to break from the other's hold. "Bide here, man. You would need wings ere you could reach Sir Nigel's side." The vessels were indeed so far apart now that the Genoese could use the full sweep of their oars and draw away rapidly from the cog. "My God, but it is a noble fight!" shouted big John, clapping his hands. "They have cleared the poop, and they spring into the waist. Well struck, my lord! Well struck, Aylward! See to Black Simon, how he storms among the shipmen. But this Spadebeard is a gallant warrior. He rallies his men upon the forecastle. He hath slain an archer. Ah, my lord is upon him. Look to it, Alleyne. See to the whirl and glitter of it." "By Heaven, Sir Nigel is down!" cried the squire. "Up!" roared John. "It was but a feint. He bears him back. He drives him to the side. By Our Lady, his sword is through him. They cry for mercy. Down go the red cross, and up springs Simon with the scarlet roses." The death of the Genoese leader did indeed bring the resistance to an end. Amid a thundering of cheering from cog and from galleys, the forked pennon fluttered upon the forecastle, and the galley, sweeping round, came slowly back as the slaves who rowed it learned the wishes of their new masters. The two knights had come aboard the cog, and the grapplings having been thrown off, the three vessels now moved abreast. Through all the storm and rush of the fight, Alleyne had been aware of the voice of Goodwin Horton, the master shipman, with his constant "Hail the bowline! Fear the sheet!" and strange it was to him to see how swiftly the blood stained sailors turned from strife to the ropes and back. Now the cog's head was turned Francewards, and the shipman walked the deck, a peaceful master mariner once more. "There is sad scathe done to the cog, Sir Nigel," said he. "Here is a hole in the side 2 ells across, the sail split through the centre, and the wood as bare as a friar's poll. In good sooth, I know not what I shall say to Master Witherton when I see the Itchen once more." "By St. Paul! it would be a very sorry thing if we suffered you to be the worse of this day's work," said Sir Nigel. "You shall take these galleys back with you, and Master Witherton may sell them. Then from the moneys he shall take as much as may make good the damage, and the rest he shall keep until our home coming, when every man shall have his share. An image of silver 15 inches high have I vowed to the Virgin, to be placed in her chapel within the priory, for that she was pleased to allow me to come upon this spade bed, who seemed to me, from what I have seen of him, to be a very sprightly and valiant gentleman. But how fares it with you, Edricson?" "It is nothing, my fair lord," said Alleyne, who had loosened his bassinet, which was cracked across by the Norman's blow. Even as he spoke, however, his head swirled round, and he fell to the deck with the blood gushing from his nose and mouth. "You will come to anon," said the knight, stooping over him and passing his fingers through his hair. "I have lost one very valiant and gentle squire this day. I can ill afford to lose another. How many men have fallen?"
"I have pricked off the tally," said Aylward, who had come aboard with his lord. "There are 7 of the Winchester men, 11 seamen, your squire, young Master Terlake, and 9 archers."
"And of the others?"
"They are all dead, save only the Norman knight who stands behind you. What would you that we should do with him?"
"He must hang on his own yard," said Sir Nigel. "It was my vow, and must be done." The pirate leader had stood by the bulwarks, a cord round his arms, and 2 stout archers on either side. At Sir Nigel's words he started violently, and his swarthy features blanched to a livid gray.
"How, Sir Knight!" he cried in broken English. "Que dites vous? To hang? Le mort du chien! To hang?"
"It is my vow," said Sir Nigel shortly. "From what I hear, you thought little enough of hanging others."
"Peasant, bas roturier!" cried the other. "It is their fitting death. Mais le Seigneur d'Andelys, avec le sang des rois dans ses veins, c'est incroyable."
Sir Nigel turned upon his heel, while 2 seamen cast a noose over the pirate's neck. At the touch of the cord he snapped the bonds which bound him, dashed one of the archers to the deck, and seizing the other round the waist, sprang with him into the sea.
"By my hilt, he is gone!" cried Aylward, rushing to the side. "They have sunk together like a stone."
"I am right glad of it," answered Sir Nigel; "for though it was against my vow to loose him, I deem that he has carried himself like a very gentle and debonair cavalier." Chapter 17 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 17. How the Yellow Cog crossed the bar of Gironde. For 2 days the Yellow Cog ran swiftly before a northeasterly wind, and on the dawn of the 3rd the high land of Ushant lay like a mist upon the shimmering skyline. There came a plump of rain towards midday, and the breeze died down, but it freshened again before nightfall, and Goodwin Horton veered his sheet and held head for the south. Next morning they had passed Belle Isle and ran through the midst of a fleet of transports returning from Guienne. Sir Nigel Loring and Sir Oliver Buttesthorn at once hung their shields over the side and displayed their pennons as was the custom, noting with the keenest interest the answering symbols which told the names of the cavaliers who had been constrained by ill health or wounds to leave the prince at so critical a time. That evening a great dun coloured cloud banked up in the west, and an anxious man was Goodwin Horton, for a third part of his crew had been slain, and half the remainder were aboard the galleys, so that with an injured ship he was little fit to meet such a storm as sweeps over those waters. All night it blew in short fitful puffs, heeling the great cog over until the water curled over her lee bulwarks. As the wind still freshened, the yard was lowered half way down the mast in the morning. Alleyne, wretchedly ill and weak, with his head still ringing from the blow which he had received, crawled up upon deck. Water swept and aslant, it was preferable to the noisome, rat haunted dungeons which served as cabins. There, clinging to the stout halyards of the sheet, he gazed with amazement at the long lines of black waves, each with its curling ridge of foam, racing in endless succession from out of the inexhaustible west. A huge sombre cloud, flecked with livid blotches, stretched over the whole seaward skyline, with long ragged streamers whirled out in front of it. Far behind them the two galleys laboured heavily, now sinking between the rollers until their yards were level with the waves, and again shooting up with a reeling, scooping motion until every spar and rope stood out hard against the sky. On the left the low lying land stretched in a dim haze, rising here and there into a darker blur which marked the higher capes and headlands. The land of France! Alleyne's eyes shone as he gazed upon it. The land of France! The very word sounded as the call of a bugle in the ears of the youth of England. The land where their fathers had bled, the home of chivalry and of knightly deeds, the country of gallant men, of courtly women, of princely buildings, of the wise, the polished, and the sainted. There it lay, so still and grey beneath the drifting wrack, the home of things noble and of things shameful, the theatre where a new name might be made, or an old one marred. From his bosom to his lips came the crumpled veil, and he breathed a vow that if valour and goodwill could raise him to his lady's side, then death alone should hold him back from her. His thoughts were still in the woods of Minstead and the old armoury of Twynham Castle, when the hoarse voice of the master shipman brought them back once more to the Bay of Biscay. "By my troth, young sir," he said, "you are as long in the face as the devil at a christening, and I cannot marvel at it, for I have sailed these waters since I was as high as this whinyard, and yet I never saw more sure promise of an evil night." "Nay, I had other things upon my mind," the squire answered. "And so has every man," cried Horton in an injured voice. "Let the shipman see to it. It is the master shipman's affair. Put it all on good Master Horton. Never had I so much care since first I blew trumpet and showed cartel at the west gate of Southampton." "What is amiss, then?" asked Alleyne, for the man's words were as gusty as the weather. "Amiss, quotha! Here am I with but half my mariners, and a hole in the ship where that 20 devil stone struck us big enough to fit the fat widow of Northam through. It is well enough on this tack, but I would have you tell me what I am to do on the other. We are like to have salt water upon us until we be found pickled like the herrings in an Easterling's barrels." "What says Sir Nigel to it?" "He is below pricking out the coat armor of his mother's uncle. Pester me not with such small matters. It was all that I could get from him. Then there is Sir Oliver. Fry them in oil with the dressing of Gascony, quoth he, and then swore at me because I had not been the cook. Walla wa, thought I. Mad master, sober man. So away forward to the archers. Harrow and alas, but they are worse than the others." "Would they not help you then?" "Nay, they sat tway and tway at a board. Him that they call Aylward, and the great red headed man who snapped the Norman's arm bone, and the black man from Norwich, and a score of others, rattling their dice in an archer's gauntlet for want of a box. 'The ship can scarce last much longer, my masters,' quoth I. 'That's your business, old swineherd,' cried the black galliot. 'Le diable t'emporte,' says Aylward. 'A 5, a 4, and the main,' shouted the big man with a voice like the flap of a sail. Hark to them now, young sir, and say if I speak not sooth." As he spoke there sounded high above the shriek of the gale and the straining of the timbers a gust of oaths with a roar of deep chested mirth from the gamblers in the forecastle. "Can I be of avail?" asked Alleyne. "Say the word and the thing is done, if two hands may do it." "Nay, nay. Your head I can see is still totty, and i' faith little head would you have had your bassinet not stood your friend. All that may be done is already carried out, for we have stuffed the gate with sails and corded it without and within. Yet when we bail our bowline and veer the sheet, our lives will hang upon the breach remaining blocked. See how yonder headland looms upon us through the mist. We must tack within 3 arrow flights, or we may find a rock through our timbers. Now, St. Christopher be praised, here is Sir Nigel with whom I may confer." "I prythee that you will pardon me," said the knight, clutching his way along the bulwark. I would not show lack of courtesy towards a worthy man, but I was deep in a matter of some weight, concerning which, Alleyne, I should be glad of your rede. It touches the question of dimidation and impalement in the coat of mine uncle, Sir John Leighton of Shropshire, who took unto wife the widow of Sir Henry Oglander of Nunwell. The case has been much debated by pursuivants and kings of arms. But how is it with you, master shipman?" "Ill enough, my fair lord. The cog must go about anon, and I know not how we may keep the water out of her." "Go call Sir Oliver," said Sir Nigel, and presently the portly knight made his way all a straddle down the slippery deck. "By my soul, master shipman, this passes all patience!" he cried wrathfully. "If this ship of yours must needs dance and skip like a clown at a kermesse, then I pray you that you will put me into one of the galeasses. I had but sat down to a flask of malvoisie and a mortress of brawn, as is my use about this hour, when there comes a jerking, and I find my wine over my legs and the flask in my lap. And then, as I stoop to clip it, there comes another cursed jerk, and there's a mortress of brawn stuck fast to the nape of my neck. At this moment I have two pages coursing after it from side to side like hounds behind a leveret. Never did living pig gambol more lightly. But you sent for me, Sir Nigel." "I would fain have your rede, Sir Oliver, for Master Horton hath fears that when we veer there may come danger from the hole in our side."
"Then do not veer,"
quoth Sir Oliver hastily. "And now, fair sir, I must hasten back to see how my rogues have fared with the brawn." "Nay, but this will scarce suffice," cried the shipman. "If we do not veer we will be upon the rocks within the hour." "Then veer," said Sir Oliver. "There is my rede. And now, Sir Nigel, I must crave." At this instant, however, a startled shout rang out from the two shipmen upon the forecastle. "Rocks!" they yelled, stabbing into the air with their forefingers. "Rocks beneath our very bows!" Through the belly of a great black wave, not 100 paces to the front of them, there thrust forth a huge jagged mass of brown stone, which spouted spray as though it were some crouching monster, while a dull menacing boom and roar filled the air. "Yare, yare!" screamed Goodwin Horton, flinging himself upon the long pole which served as a tiller. "Cut the halyard! Haul her over! Lay her two courses to the wind!" Over swung the great boom, and the cog trembled and quivered within 5 spear lengths of the breakers. "She can scarce draw clear," cried Horton, with his eyes from the sail to the seething line of foam. "May the holy Julian stand by us, and the thrice sainted Christopher!" "If there be such peril, Sir Oliver," quoth Sir Nigel, "it would be very knightly and fitting that we should show our pennons. I pray you, Edricson, that you will command my guidon bearer to put forward my banner." "And sound the trumpets!" cried Sir Oliver. "In manus tuus, Domine. I am in the keeping of James of Compostella, to whose shrine I shall make pilgrimage, and in whose honor I vow that I will eat a carp each year upon his feast day. Mon Dieu, but the waves roar! How is it with us now, master shipman?" "We draw, we draw!" cried Horton, with his eyes still fixed upon the foam which hissed under the very bulge of the side. "Holy Mother be with us now!" As he spoke the cog rasped along the edge of the reef, and a long white curling sheet of wood was planed off from her side from waist to poop by a jutting horn of the rock. At the same instant she lay suddenly over, and the sail drew full, and she plunged seawards amid the shoutings of the seamen and the archers. "Virgin be praised!" cried the shipman, wiping his brow. "For this shall bell swing and candle burn when I see Southampton water once more. Cheerily, my hearts, pull yarely on the bowline." "By my soul, I would rather have a dry death," quoth Sir Oliver, "though, mort Dieu, I have eaten so many fish that it were but justice that the fish should eat me. Now I must back to the cabin, for I have matters there which crave my attention." "Nay, Sir Oliver, you had best bide with us and still show your ensign," Sir Nigel answered. "For if I understand the matter aright, we have but turned from one danger to the other." "Good Master Horton," cried the boatswain, rushing aft, "the water comes in upon us apace. The waves have driven in the sail wherewith we strove to stop the hole." As he spoke the seamen came swarming on to the poop and the forecastle to avoid the torrent which poured through the huge leak in the waist. High above the roar of the wind and the clash of the sea rose the shrill, half human cries of the horses as they found the water rising rapidly around them. "Stop it from without!" cried Horton, seizing the end of the wet sail with which the gap had been plugged. Speedily, my hearts, or we're gone." Swiftly they rove ropes to the corners, and then, rushing forward to the bows, they lowered them under the keel and drew them tight in such a way that the sail should cover the outer face of the gap. The force of the rush of water was checked by this obstacle, but it still squirted plentifully from every side of it. At the sides the hawsers were above the belly, and in the centre a man from the poop could scarce touch the deck with a 7-foot spear. The cog lay lower in the water, and the waves splashed freely over the weather bulwark. "I fear we can scarce bide upon this tack," cried Horton, "and yet the other will drive us on the rocks." "Might we not haul down sail and wait for better times?" suggested Sir Nigel. "Nay, we should drift upon the rocks. 30 years have I been on the sea, and never yet in greater straits. Yet we are in the hands of the saints." "Of whom," cried Sir Oliver, "I look more particularly to St. James of Compostella, who hath already befriended us this day, and on whose feast I hereby vow that I shall eat a second carp, if he will but interpose a second time." The rack had thickened seaward, and the coast was but a blurred line. Two vague shadows in the offing showed where the galleasses rolled and tossed upon the great Atlantic rollers. Horton looked wistfully in their direction. "If they would but lie closer we might find safety, even should the cog founder. You will bear me out with good Master Witherton of Southampton that I have done all that a shipman might. It would be well that you should doff camail and greaves, Sir Nigel, for by the Black Rood it is like enough that we shall have to swim for it." "Nay," said the little knight, "it would scarce be fitting that a cavalier should throw off his harness for the fear of every puff of wind and puddle of water. I would rather that my company should gather round me here on the poop, where we might abide together, whatever God may be pleased to send. But, certes, Master Horton, for all that my sight is none of the best, it is not the first time that I have seen that headland upon the left." The seaman shaded his eyes with his hand and gazed earnestly through the haze and spray. Suddenly he threw up his arms and shouted aloud in his joy. "'Tis the point of La Tremblade!" he cried. "I had not thought that we were as far as Oloron. The Gironde lies before us, and once over the bar and under the shelter of the Tour de Cordon, all will be well with us. Veer again, my hearts, and bring her to try with the main course." The sail swung round once more, and the cog, battered and torn and well nigh waterlogged, staggered in for this haven of refuge. A bluff cape to the north and a long spit to the south marked the mouth of the noble river, with a low lying island of silted sand in the centre, all shrouded and curtained by the spume of the breakers. A line of broken water traced the dangerous bar, which in clear day and balmy weather has cracked the back of many a tall ship. "There is a channel," said Horton, "which was shown to me by the prince's own pilot. Mark yonder tree upon the bank, and see the tower which rises behind it. If these two be held in line, even as we hold them now, it may be done, though our ship draws 2 ells more than when she put forth." "God speed you, Master Horton!" cried Sir Oliver. "Twice have we come scatheless out of peril, and now for the third time I commend me to the blessed James of Compostella, to whom I vow—" "Nay, nay, old friend," whispered Sir Nigel. "You are like to bring a judgment upon us with these vows, which no living man could accomplish. Have I not already heard you vow to eat 2 carp in one day, and now you would venture upon a third?" "I pray that you will order the company to lie down," cried Horton, who had taken the tiller and was gazing ahead with fixed eye. "In 3 minutes we shall either be lost or in safety." Archers and seamen lay flat upon the deck, waiting in stolid silence for whatever fate might come. Horton bent his weight upon the tiller and crouched to see under the bellying sail. Sir Oliver and Sir Nigel stood erect with hands crossed in front of the poop. Down swooped the great cog into the narrow channel which was the portal to safety. On either bow roared the shallow bar. Right ahead one small lane of black swirling water marked the pilot's course, but true was the eye and firm the hand which guided. A dull scraping came from beneath. The vessel quivered and shook. At the waist, at the quarter, and behind sounded the grim roaring of the waters, and with a plunge the yellow cog was over the bar and speeding swiftly up the broad and tranquil estuary of the Gironde. Chapter 17. Chapter 18 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 18. How Sir Nigel Loring put a patch upon his eye. It was on the morning of Friday, the 28th day of November, 2 days before the feast of St. Andrew, that the Cog and her 2 prisoners, after a weary tacking up the Gironde and the Garonne, dropped anchor at last in front of the noble city of Bordeaux. With wonder and admiration, Alleyne, leaning over the bulwarks, gazed at the forest of masts, the swarm of boats darting hither and thither on the bosom of the broad curving stream, and the grey crescent shaped city, which stretched with many a tower and minaret along the western shore. Never had he in his quiet life seen so great a town, nor was there in the whole of England, save London alone, one which might match it in size or in wealth. Here came the merchandise of all the fair countries which are watered by the Garonne and the Dordogne, the cloths of the south, the skins of Guyenne, the wines of the Medoc, to be borne away to Hull, Exeter, Dartmouth, Bristol, or Chester, in exchange for the wools and woolfels of England. Here too dwelt those famous smelters and welders who had made the Bordeaux steel the most trusty upon earth, and could give a temper to lance or sword which might mean dear life to its owner. Alleyne could see the smoke of their forges reeking up in the clear morning air. The storm had died down now to a gentle breeze, which wafted to his ears the long drawn stirring bugle calls which sounded from the ancient ramparts.
"Hola, mon petit,"
said Aylward, coming up to where he stood.
"Thou art a squire now, and like enough to win the golden spurs. Well, I am still a master bowman, and master bowman I shall bide. I dare scarce wag my tongue so freely with you as when we tramped together past Wilverley Chase, else I might be your guide, for indeed I know every house in Bordeaux as a friar knows the beads of his rosary."
"Nay, Aylward," said Alleyne, laying his hand upon the sleeve of his companion's frayed jerkin, "you cannot think me so thrall as to throw aside an old friend because I have had some small share of good fortune. I take it unkind that you should have thought such evil of me."
"Nay, mon gar, 'twas but a flight shot to see if the wind blew steady, though I were a rogue to doubt it."
"Why, had I not met you, Aylward, at the Lyndhurst inn, who can say where I had now been? Certes, I had not gone to Twynham Castle, nor become squire to Sir Nigel, nor met—" He paused abruptly and flushed to his hair, but the bowman was too busy with his own thoughts to notice his young companion's embarrassment.
"It was a good hostel, that of the Pied Merlin," he remarked. "By my 10 finger bones, when I hang bow on nail and change my brigandine for a tunic, I might do worse than take over the dame and her business."
"I thought," said Alleyne, "that you were betrothed to some one at Christchurch."
"To 3," Aylward answered moodily. "To 3. I fear I may not go back to Christchurch. I might chance to see hotter service in Hampshire than I have ever done in Gascony. But mark you now yonder lofty turret in the centre, which stands back from the river and hath a broad banner on the summit. See, the rising sun flashes full upon it and sparkles on the golden lions. 'Tis the royal banner of England, crossed by the prince's label. There he dwells in the Abbey of St. Andrew, where he hath kept his court these years back. Beside it is the minster of the same saint, who hath the town under his very special care."
"And how of yon grey turret on the left?"
"'Tis the fane of St. Michael, as that on the right is of St. Remy. There too, above the poop of yonder nef, you see the tower of Saint Croix and of Pays Berlon. Mark also the mighty ramparts, which are pierced by 3 water gates and 16 others to the landward side."
"And how is it, good Aylward, that there comes so much music from the town? I seem to hear 100 trumpets all calling in chorus."
"It would be strange else, seeing that all the great lords of England and of Gascony are within the walls, and each would have his trumpeter blow as loud as his neighbor, lest it might be thought that his dignity had been abated. Ma foi, they make as much louster as a Scotch army, where every man fills himself with griddle cakes and sits up all night to blow upon his tootle pipe. See all along the banks how the pages water the horses, and there beyond the town how they gallop them over the plain. For every horse you see, a belted knight hath herbage in the town. for as I learn, the men at arms and archers have already gone forward to Dax."
"I trust, Aylward," said Sir Nigel, coming up on deck, "that the men are ready for the land. Go tell them that the boats will be for them within the hour." The archer raised his hand in salute and hastened forward. In the meantime Sir Oliver had followed his brother knight, and the two paced the poop together. Sir Nigel in his plum colored velvet suit, with flat cap of the same, adorned in front with a Lady Loring's glove, and girt round with a curling ostrich feather. The lusty knight, on the other hand, was clad in the very latest mode, with cote hardie, doublet, pourpoint, court pie, and paltock of olive green, picked out with pink and jagged at the edges. A red chaperon or cap, with long hanging cornet, sat daintily on the back of his black curled head, while his gold hued shoes were twisted up à la poulaine, as though the toes were shooting forth a tendril which might hope in time to entwine itself around his massive leg. "Once more, Sir Oliver," said Sir Nigel, looking shorewards with sparkling eyes, "do we find ourselves at the gate of honor, the door which hath so often led us to all that is knightly and worthy. There flies the prince's banner, and it would be well that we haste ashore and pay obeisance to him. The boats already swarm from the bank."
"There is a goodly hostel near the west gate which is famed for the stewing of spiced pullets," remarked Sir Oliver. "We might take the edge off our hunger ere we seek the prince, for though his tables are gay with damask and silver, he is no trencherman himself, and hath no sympathy for those who are his betters."
"His betters? His betters before the trencher, lad.
Sniff not treason where none is meant.
I have seen him smile in his quiet way because I looked for the fourth time towards the carving, squire. And indeed, to watch him dallying with a little gobbet of bread or sipping his cup of thrice watered wine is enough to make a man feel shame at his own hunger. Yet war and glory, my good friend, though well enough in their way, will not serve to tighten such a belt as clasps my waist."
"How read you that coat which hangs over yonder galley, Alleyne?" asked Sir Nigel. "Argent, a bend vert between cotis dancet gules. It is a northern coat. I have seen it in the train of the Percies. From the shields there is not one of these vessels which hath not knight or baron aboard. I would mine eyes were better. How read you this upon the left?" "Argent and azure, a barry wavy of 6. Ha, it is the sign of the Wiltshire Stourtons. And there beyond I see the red and silver of the Worsleys of Apuldercombe, who, like myself, are of Hampshire lineage. Close behind us is the mulline cross of the gallant William Molyneux, and beside it the bloody chevrons of the Norfolk Woodhouses, with the amulets of the Musgraves of Westmoreland. By St. Paul, it would be a very strange thing if so noble a company were to gather without some notable deed of arms arising from it. And here is our boat, Sir Oliver, so it seems best to me that we should go to the abbey with our squires, leaving Master Horton to have his own way with the unloading." The horses, both of knights and squires, were speedily lowered into a broad lighter, and reached the shore almost as soon as their masters. Sir Nigel bent his knee devoutly as he put foot on land, and taking a small patch from his bosom, he bound it tightly over his left eye. "May the blessed George and the memory of my sweet lady love raise high my heart," quoth he. "And as a token I vow that I will not take this patch from my eye until I have seen something of this country of Spain, and done such a small deed as it lies in me to do. And this I swear upon the cross of my sword and upon the glove of my lady."
"In truth, you take me back 20 years, Nigel," quoth Sir Oliver, as they mounted and rode slowly through the water gate. "After Cadsand I deemed that the French thought that we were an army of the blind, for there was scarce a man who had not closed an eye for the greater love and honor of his lady. Yet it goes hard with you that you should darken one side, when with both open you can scarce tell a horse from a mule. In truth, friend, I think that you step over the line of reason in this matter."
"Sir Oliver Buttesthorn," said the little knight shortly, "I would have you to understand that, blind as I am, I can yet see the path of honor very clearly, and that is the road upon which I do not crave another man's guidance."
"By my soul," said Sir Oliver, "you are as tart as verjuice this morning. If you are bent upon a quarrel with me, then I must leave you to your humor, and drop into the tet door here, for I marked a varlet pass the door who bore a smoking dish which had, methought, a most excellent smell." "Nenny, Nenny," cried his comrade, laying his hand upon his knee, "we have known each other over long to fall out, Oliver, like two raw pages at their first épreuve. You must come with me first to the prince, and then back to the hostel, though sure I am that it would grieve his heart that any gentle cavalier should turn from his board to a common tavern. But is that not my Lord Delewar who waves to us?"
"Ah, my fair lord, God and our Lady be with you."
"Oh, and there's Sir Robert Cheney. Good morrow, Robert. I am right glad to see you." The two knights walked their horses abreast, while Alleyne and Ford, with John Norbury, who was squire to Sir Oliver, kept some paces behind them, a spear's length in front of Black Simon and of the Winchester guidon bearer. Norbury, a lean, silent man, had been to those parts before, and sat his horse with a rigid neck; but the two young squires gazed eagerly to right or left, and plucked each other's sleeves to call attention to the many strange things on every side of them. "See to the brave stalls!" cried Alleyne. "See to the noble armor set forth, and the costly taffeta. And oh, Ford, see to where the scrivener sits with his pigments and the inkhorns, and the rolls of sheepskin as white as the Beaulieu napery. Saw man ever the like before?" "Nay, man, there are finer stalls in Cheapside," answered Ford, whose father had taken him to London on occasion of one of the Smithfield joustings. "I have seen a silversmith's booth there which would serve to buy either side of the street. But mark these houses, Alleyne, how they thrust forth upon the top. And see to the coats of arms at every window, and banner or pencil in the roof." "And the churches!" cried Alleyne. "The priory at Christchurch was a noble pile, but it was cold and bare, methinks, by one of these, with their frettings and their carvings and their traceries, as though some great ivy plant of stone had curled and wantoned over the walls." "And hark to the speech of the folk!" said Ford. "Was ever such a hissing and clacking? I wonder that they have not wit to learn English, now that they have come under the English crown. By Richard of Hampole, there are fair faces among them. See the wench with the brown wimple. Out on you, Alleyne, that you would rather gaze upon dead stone than on living flesh." It was little wonder that the richness and ornament, not only of the church and of stall, but of every private house as well, should have impressed itself upon the young squires. The town was now at the height of its fortunes. Beside its trade and its armorers, other causes had combined to pour wealth into it. War, which had wrought evil upon so many fair cities around, had brought naught but good to this one. As her French sisters decayed, she increased. For here, from north and from east and from south, came the plunder to be sold and the ransom money to be spent. Through all her 16 landward gates there had set for many years a double tide of empty handed soldiers hurrying Francewards, and of enriched and laden bands who brought their spoils home. The prince's court, too, with its swarms of noble barons and wealthy knights, many of whom, in imitation of their master, had brought their ladies and their children from England, all helped to swell the coffers of the burghers. Now, with this fresh influx of noblemen and cavaliers, food and lodging were scarce to be had, and the prince was hurrying forward his forces to Dax in Gascony to relieve the overcrowding of his capital. In front of the minster and abbey of St. Andrew's was a large square crowded with priests, soldiers, women, friars, and burghers, who made it their common centre for sightseeing and gossip. Amid the knot of noisy and gesticulating townsfolk, many small parties of mounted knights and squires threaded their way towards the prince's quarters, where the huge iron clamped doors were thrown back to show that he held audience within. 20 archers stood about the gateway, and beat back from time to time with their bow staves the inquisitive and chattering crowd who swarmed round the portal. 2 knights in full armor, with lances raised and closed visors, sat their horses on either side, while in the centre, with 2 pages to tend upon him, there stood a noble faced man in flowing purple gown, who pricked off upon a sheet of parchment the style and title of each applicant, marshalling them in their due order, and giving to each the place and facility which his rank demanded.
His long white beard and searching eye imparted to him an air of masterful dignity, which was increased by his tabard like vesture and the heraldic barret cap with triple plume which bespoke his office. "It is Sir William de Pakington, the prince's own herald and scrivener," whispered Sir Nigel, as he pulled up amid the line of knights who waited admission. "Ill fares it with the man who would venture to deceive him. He hath by rote the name of every knight of France or of England, and all the tree of his family, with his kinships, coat armor, marriages, augmentations, abatements, and I know not what besides. We may leave our horses here with the varlets, and push forward with our squires." Following Sir Nigel's counsel, they pressed on upon foot until they were close to the prince's secretary, who was in high debate with a young and foppish knight who was bent upon making his way past him. "Mackworth," said the king at arms, "it is in my mind, young sir, that you have not been presented before." "Nay, it is but a day since I set foot in Bordeaux, but I feared lest the prince should think it strange that I had not waited upon him." "The prince hath other things to think upon," quoth Sir William de Pakington. "But if you be a Mackworth, you must be a Mackworth of Normanton, and indeed I see now that your coat is sable and ermine." "I am a Mackworth of Normanton," the other answered, with some uneasiness of manner. "Then you must be Sir Stephen Mackworth, for I learn that when old Sir Guy died he came in for the arms and the name, the war cry and the profit." "Sir Stephen is my elder brother, and I am Arthur, the second son," said the youth. "In sooth and in sooth!" cried the king at arms, with scornful eyes. "And pray, sir second son, where is the cadency mark which should mark your rank? Dare you to wear your brother's coat without the crescent which should stamp you as his cadet? Away to your lodgings, and come not nigh the prince until the armorer hath placed the true charge upon your shield." As the youth withdrew in confusion, Sir William's keen eye singled out the 5 red roses from amid the overlapping shields and cloud of pennons which faced him. "Ah!" he cried, "there are charges here which are above counterfeit. The roses of Loring and the boar's head of Buttesthorn may stand back in peace, but by my faith they are not to be held back in war. Welcome, Sir Oliver, Sir Nigel. Chandos will be glad to his very heart roots when he sees you. This way, my fair sirs. Your squires are doubtless worthy of the fame of their masters. Down this passage, Sir Oliver. Edricson, ha! One of the old strain of Hampshire Edricsons, I doubt not. And Ford, they are of a South Saxon stock and of good repute. There are Norburys in Cheshire and in Wiltshire, and also, as I have heard, upon the borders. So, my fair sirs, and I shall see that you are shortly admitted." He had finished his professional commentary by flinging open a folding door, and ushering the party into a broad hall which was filled with a great number of people who were waiting, like themselves, for an audience. The room was very spacious, lighted on one side by 3 arched and mullioned windows, while opposite was a huge fireplace, in which a pile of faggots was blazing merrily. Many of the company had crowded round the flames, for the weather was bitterly cold, but the 2 knights seated themselves upon a buncal, with their squires standing behind them. Looking down the room, Alleyne marked that both floor and ceiling were of the richest oak, the latter spanned by 12 arching beams, which were adorned at either end by the lilies and the lions of the royal arms. At the further side was a small door, on each side of which stood men at arms. From time to time an elderly man in black, with rounded shoulders and a long white wand in his hand, came softly forth from this inner room and beckoned to one or other of the company, who doffed cap and followed him. The 2 knights were deep in talk when Alleyne became aware of a remarkable individual who was walking round the room in their direction. As he passed each knot of cavaliers, every head turned to look after him, and it was evident, from the bows and respectful salutations on all sides, that the interest which he excited was not merely due to his strange personal appearance. He was tall and straight as a lance, though of great age, for his hair, which curled from under his velvet cap of maintenance, was as white as the new fallen snow. Yet from the swing of his stride and the spring of his step it was clear that he had not yet lost the fire and activity of his youth. His fierce hawk like face was clean shaven, like that of a priest, save for a long thin wisp of white moustache which drooped down half way to his shoulder. That he had been handsome might easily be judged from his high aquiline nose and clear cut chin, but his features had been so distorted by the seams and scars of old wounds, and by the loss of one eye which had been torn from the socket, that there was little left to remind one of the dashing young knight who had been 50 years ago the fairest as well as the boldest of the English chivalry. Yet what knight was there in that hall of St. Andrew's who would not have gladly laid down youth, beauty, and all that he possessed to win the fame of this man? For who could be named with Chandos, the stainless knight, the wise counsellor, the valiant warrior, the hero of Crecy or of Winchelsea, of Poitiers, of Auray, and of as many other battles as there had been years to his life? "Ah, my little heart of gold!" he cried, darting forward suddenly and throwing his arms round Sir Nigel. "I heard that you were here, and have been seeking you." "My fair and dear lord," said the knight, returning the warrior's embrace, "I have indeed come back to you, for where else shall I go that I may learn to be a gentle and hardy knight?" "By my troth," said Chandos with a smile, "it is very fitting that we should be companions, Nigel; for since you have tied up one of your eyes, and I have the mischance to lose one of mine, we have but a pair between us. Ah, Sir Oliver, you were on my blind side of me, and I saw you not. A wise woman hath made prophecy that this blind side will one day be the death of me. We shall go into the prince anon, but in truth he hath much upon his hands, for what with Pedro, and the King of Majorca, and the King of Navarre, who is in no 2 days of the same mind, and the Gascon barons, who are all chaffering for terms like so many hucksters, he hath an uneasy part to play. But how left you the Lady Loring?" "She is well, my fair lord, and sent her service and greetings to you." "I am ever her knight and slave. And your journey, I trust that it was pleasant?" "As heart could wish. We had sight of 2 rover galleys, and even came to some slight bickering with them." "Ever in luck's way, Nigel," quoth Sir John. "We must hear the tale anon. But I deem it best that you should leave your squires and come with me, for howsoe'er pressed the prince may be, I am very sure that he would be loath to keep 2 old comrades in arms upon the further side of the door. Follow close behind me, and I will forestall old Sir William, though I can scarce promise to roll forth your style and rank as is his wont." So saying, he led the way to the inner chamber, the 2 companions treading close at his heels, and nodding to right and left as they caught sight of familiar faces among the crowd. Chapter 18. Of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 19. How there was a stir at the Abbey of St. Andrew's. The prince's reception room, although of no great size, was fitted up with all the state and luxury which the fame and power of its owner demanded. A high dais at the further end was roofed in by a broad canopy of scarlet velvet spangled with silver fleur de lis, and supported at either corner by silver rods. This was approached by 4 steps carpeted with the same material, while all round were scattered rich cushions, oriental mats, and costly rugs of fur. The choicest tapestries which the looms of Arras could furnish draped the walls, whereon the battles of Judas Maccabeus were set forth, with the Jewish warriors in plate of proof, with crest and lance and banderole, as the native artists of the day were wont to depict them. A few rich settles and bancals, choicely carved and decorated with glazed leather hangings of the sort termed or bassin, completed the furniture of the apartment, save that at one end of the dais there stood a lofty perch, upon which a cast of 3 solemn Prussian gerfalcons sat, hooded and jesseled, as silent and motionless as the royal fowler who stood beside them. In the centre of the dais were 2 very high chairs with dorserets, which arched forwards over the heads of the occupants, the whole covered with light blue silk thickly powdered with golden stars. On that to the right sat a very tall and well formed man, with red hair, a livid face, and a cold blue eye which had in it something peculiarly sinister and menacing. He lounged back in a careless position, and yawned repeatedly, as though heartily weary of the proceedings, stooping from time to time to fondle a shaggy Spanish greyhound which lay stretched at his feet. On the other throne there was perched, bolt upright, with prim demeanour, as though he felt himself to be upon his good behaviour, a little round pippin faced person, who smiled and bobbed to every one whose eyes he chanced to meet. Between and a little in front of them, on a humble charette or stool, sat a slim dark young man, whose quiet attire and modest manner would scarce proclaim him to be the most noted prince in Europe. A jupon of dark blue cloth, tagged with buckles and pendants of gold, seemed but a sombre and plain attire amidst the wealth of silk and ermine and gilt tissue of fustian with which he was surrounded. He sat with his two hands clasped round his knee, his head slightly bent, and an expression of impatience and of trouble upon his clear, well chiselled features. Behind the thrones there stood two men in purple gowns, with ascetic, clean shaven faces, and half a dozen other high dignitaries and office holders of Aquitaine. Below, on either side of the steps, were 40 or 50 barons, knights, and courtiers, ranged in a triple row to the right and the left, with a clear passage in the centre. "There sits the prince," whispered Sir John Chandos as they entered. "He on the right is Pedro, whom we are about to put upon the Spanish throne. The other is Don James, whom we purpose, with the aid of God, to help to his throne in Majorca. Now follow me, and take it not to heart if he be a little short in his speech, for indeed his mind is full of very many weighty concerns." The prince, however, had already observed their entrance, and springing to his feet, he advanced with a winning smile and the light of welcome in his eyes. "We do not need your good offices as herald here, Sir John," said he in a low but clear voice. "These valiant knights are very well known to me. Welcome to Aquitaine, Sir Nigel Loring and Sir Oliver Buttesthorn. Nay, nay, keep your knee for my sweet father at Windsor. I would have your hands, my friends. We are like to give you some work to do ere you see the downs of Hampshire once more. Know you aught of Spain, Sir Oliver?"
"Naught, my sire, save that I have heard men say that there is a dish named an olla which is prepared there, though I have never been clear in my mind as to whether it was but a ragout, such as is to be found in the south, or whether there is some seasoning, such as fennel or garlic, which is peculiar to Spain."
"Your doubts, Sir Oliver, shall soon be resolved," answered the prince, laughing heartily, as did many of the barons who surrounded them. "His Majesty here will doubtless order that you will have this dish hotly seasoned when we are all safely in Castile."
"I will have a hotly seasoned dish for some folk I know of," answered Don Pedro with a cold smile.
"But my friend Sir Oliver can fight right hardily without either bite or sup," remarked the prince. "Did I not see him at Poitiers, when for 2 days we had not more than a crust of bread and a cup of foul water, yet carrying himself most valiantly? With my own 2 eyes I saw him in the rout sweep the head from a knight of Picardy with one blow of his sword."
"The rogue got between me and the nearest French victual wain," muttered Sir Oliver, amid a fresh titter from those who were near enough to catch his words.
"Right. How many have you in your train?" asked the prince, assuming a graver mien.
"I have 40 men at arms, sire," said Sir Oliver.
"And I have 100 archers and a score of lancers, but there are 200 men who wait for me on this side of the water upon the borders of Navarre." "And who are they, Sir Nigel?" "There are 3 companies, sire, and they are called the White Company." To the astonishment of the knight, his words provoked a burst of merriment from the barons round, in which the 2 kings and the prince were fain to join. Sir Nigel blinked mildly from one to the other, until at last, perceiving a stout black bearded knight at his elbow, whose laugh rang somewhat louder than the others, he touched him lightly upon the sleeve. "Perchance, my fair sir," he whispered, "there is some small vow of which I may relieve you. Might we not have some honourable debate upon the matter? Your gentle courtesy may perhaps grant me an exchange of thrusts." "Nay, nay, Sir Nigel," cried the prince, "fasten not the offence upon Sir Robert Briquet, for we are one and all bogged in the same mire. Truth to say, our ears have just been vexed by the doings of the same company,
and I have even now made vow to hang the man who held the rank of captain over it. I little thought to find him among the bravest of my own chosen chieftains. But the vow is now naught, for as you have never seen your company, it would be a fool's act to blame you for their doings." "My liege," said Sir Nigel, "it is a very small matter that I should be hanged, albeit the manner of death is somewhat more ignoble than I had hoped for. On the other hand, it would be a very grievous thing that you, the Prince of England and the flower of knighthood, should make a vow, whether in ignorance or no, and fail to bring it to fulfilment." "Vex not your mind on that," the prince answered, smiling. "We have had a citizen from Montauban here this very day who told us such a tale of sack and murder and pillage that it moved our blood, but our wrath was turned upon the man who was in authority over them." "My dear and honored master," cried Nigel, in great anxiety, "I fear me much that in your gentleness of heart you are straining this vow which you have taken. If there be so much as a shadow of a doubt as to the form of it, it were 1,000 times best." "Peace, peace!" cried the prince impatiently. "I am very well able to look to my own vows and their performance. We hope to see you both in the banquet hall anon. Meanwhile you will attend upon us with our train." He bowed, and Chandos, plucking Sir Oliver by the sleeve, led them both away to the back of the press of courtiers. "Why, little coz," he whispered, "you are very eager to have your neck in a noose. By my soul, had you asked as much from our new ally Don Pedro, he had not balked you. Between friends, there is overmuch of the hangman in him, and too little of the prince. But indeed this White Company is a rough band, and may take some handling ere you find yourself safe in your captaincy." "I doubt not, with the help of St. Paul, that I shall bring them to some order," Sir Nigel answered. "But there are many faces here which are new to me, though others have been before me since first I waited upon my dear master, Sir Walter. I pray you to tell me, Sir John, who are these priests upon the dais?" "One is the Bishop of Bordeaux, Nigel, and the other is the Bishop of Agen." "And the dark knight with gray streaked beard? By my troth, he seems to be a man of much wisdom and valor." "He is Sir William Felton, who with my unworthy self is the chief counsellor to the prince, he being high steward and I the seneschal of Aquitaine. And the knights upon the right, beside Don Pedro? They are cavaliers of Spain who have followed him in his exile. The one at his elbow is Fernando de Castro, who is as brave and true a man as heart could wish. In front, to the right, are the Gascon lords. You may well tell them by their clouded brows, for there hath been some ill will of late betwixt the prince and them. The tall and burly man is the Captal de Buch, whom I doubt not that you know, for a braver knight never laid lance in rest. That heavy faced cavalier who plucks his skirts and whispers in his ear is Lord Oliver de Clisson, also known as the Butcher. He it is who stirs up strife and forever blows the dying embers into flame. The man with the mole upon his cheek is the Lord Pommers, and his two brothers stand behind him, with the Lord Lespin, Lord de Rosem, Lord de Mucident, Sir Beducas d'Albret, the Souldich de la Traine, and others. Further back are knights from Quercy, Limousin, Saintonge, Pitou, and Aquitaine, with the valiant Sir Guiscard d'Angle. That is he in the rose colored doublet with the ermine. And the knights upon this side, they are all Englishmen, some of the household, and others who, like yourself, are captains of companies. There is Lord Neville, Sir Stephen Cossington, Sir Matthew Gurney, with Sir Walter Hewett, Sir Thomas Bannister, and Sir Thomas Felton, who is the brother of the high steward. Mark well the man with the high nose and flaxen beard, who hath placed his hand upon the shoulder of the dark, hard faced cavalier in the rust stained jupon. "Aye, by St. Paul!" observed Sir Nigel, "they both bear the print of their armor upon their coat hardies. Methinks they are men who breathe freer in a camp than a court." "There are many of us who do that, Nigel," said Chandos, "and the head of the court is, I dare warrant, among them. But of these two men the one is Sir Hugh Calverley, and the other is Sir Robert Knolles." Sir Nigel and Sir Oliver craned their necks to have the clearer view of these famous warriors, the one a chosen leader of free companies, the other a man who by his fierce valor and energy had raised himself from the lowest ranks until he was second only to Chandos himself in the esteem of the army. "He hath no light hand in war, hath Sir Robert," said Chandos, If he passes through a country, you may tell it for some years to come. I have heard that in the north it is still the use to call a house which hath but the two gable ends left, without walls or roof, a Knolles mitre." "I have often heard of him," said Nigel, "and I have hoped to be so far honoured as to run a course with him. But hark, Sir John, what is amiss with the prince?" Whilst Chandos had been conversing with the two knights, a continuous stream of suitors had been ushered in, adventurers seeking to sell their swords, and merchants clamouring over some grievance, a ship detained for the carriage of troops, or a tun of sweet wine which had the bottom knocked out by a troop of thirsty archers. A few words from the prince disposed of each case, and if the applicant liked not the judgment, a quick glance from the prince's dark eyes sent him to the door with the grievance all gone out of him. The younger ruler had sat listlessly upon his stool, with the two puppet monarchs enthroned behind him; but of a sudden a dark shadow passed over his face, and he sprang to his feet in one of those gusts of passion which were the single blot upon his noble and generous character. "How now, Don Martin de la Carra?" he cried. "How now, sirrah? What message do you bring to us from our brother of Navarre?" The newcomer to whom this abrupt query had been addressed was a tall and exceedingly handsome cavalier, who had just been ushered into the apartment. His swarthy cheek and raven black hair spoke of the fiery south, and he wore his long black cloak swathed across his chest and over his shoulders in a graceful sweeping fashion which was neither English nor French. With stately steps and many profound bows he advanced to the foot of the dais before replying to the prince's question. "My powerful and illustrious master," he began, "Charles, King of Navarre, Earl of Evreux, Count of Champagne, who also writeth himself Overlord of Béarn, hereby sends his love and greetings to his dear cousin Edward, the Prince of Wales, Governor of Aquitaine, Grand Commander of—" "Tush, tush, Don Martin!" interrupted the prince, who had been beating the ground with his foot impatiently during this stately preamble. "We already know our cousin's titles and styles, and certes we know our own. To the point, man, and at once. Are the passes open to us, or does your master go back from his word, pledged to me at Libourne no later than last Michaelmas?" "It would ill become my gracious master, sire, to go back from promise given. He does but ask some delay, and certain conditions and hostages." "Conditions! Hostages! Is he speaking to the Prince of England, or is it to the bourgeois provost of some half captured town? Conditions, quotha! He may find much to mend his own condition ere long. The passes are, then, closed to us?" "Nay, sire." "They are open, then?" "Nay, sire, if you would but—" "Enough, enough, Don Martin," cried the prince. "It is a sorry sight to see so true a knight pleading in so false a cause. We know the doings of our cousin Charles. We know that while with the right hand he takes our 50,000 crowns for the holding of the passes open, he hath his left outstretched to Henry of Trastamare or to the King of France, all ready to take as many more for the keeping them closed. I know our good Charles, and by my blessed namesaint the Confessor he shall learn that I know him. He sets his kingdom up to the best bidder, like some scullion farrier selling a glandered horse. He is—" "My lord," cried Don Martin, "I cannot stand there to hear such words of my master. Did they come from other lips I should know better how to answer them." Don Pedro frowned and curled his lip, but the prince smiled and nodded his approbation. "Your bearing and your words, Don Martin, are such as I would have looked for in you," he remarked. "You will tell the king, your master, that he hath been paid his price, and that if he holds to his promise he hath my word for it that no scathe shall come to his people, nor to their houses or gear. If, however, we have not his leave, I shall come close at the heels of this message without his leave, and bearing a key with me which shall open all that he may close." He stooped and whispered to Sir Robert Knolles and Sir Hugh Calverley, who smiled as men well pleased, and hastened from the room. "Our cousin Charles has had experience of our friendship," the prince continued, "and now, by the saints, he shall feel a touch of our displeasure. I send now a message to our cousin Charles, which his whole kingdom may read. Let him take heed lest worse befall him. Where is my Lord Chandos? Ah, Sir John, I commend this worthy knight to your care. You will see that he hath refection and such purse of gold as may defray his charges, for indeed it is a great honor to any court to have within it so noble and gentle a cavalier. How say you, sire?
he asked, turning to the Spanish refugee, while the herald of Navarre was conducted from the chamber by the old warrior. "It is not our custom in Spain to reward pertness in a messenger," Don Pedro answered, patting the head of his greyhound. "Yet we have all heard the lengths to which your royal generosity runs." "In sooth, yes," cried the King of Majorca. "And who should know it better than we," said Don Pedro bitterly, "since we have had to fly to you in our trouble as to the natural protector of all who are weak?" "Nay, nay, as brothers to a brother," cried the prince with sparkling eyes. "We doubt not, with the help of God, to see you very soon restored to those thrones from which you have been so traitorously thrust." "When that happy day comes," said Pedro, "then Spain shall be to you as Aquitaine, and, be your project what it may, you may ever count on every troop and every ship over which flies the banner of Castile." "And," added the other, "upon every aid which the wealth and power of Majorca can bestow." "Touching the 100,000 crowns in which I stand your debtor," continued Pedro carelessly, "it can no doubt " "Not a word, sire, not a word," cried the prince. "It is not now, when you are in grief, that I would vex your mind with such base and sordid matters. I have said once and forever that I am yours with every bowstring of my army and every florin in my coffers." "Ah, here is indeed a mirror of chivalry," said Don Pedro. "I think, Sir Fernando, since the prince's bounty is stretched so far, that we may make further use of his gracious goodness to the extent of 50,000 crowns. Good Sir William Felton here will doubtless settle the matter with you." The stout old English counsellor looked somewhat blank at this prompt acceptance of his master's bounty. "If it please your sire," he said, "the public funds are at their lowest, seeing that I have paid 12,000 men of the companies, and the new taxes, the hearth tax and the wine tax, not yet come in. If you could wait until the promised help from England comes " "Nay, nay, my sweet cousin," cried Don Pedro. "Had we known that your own coffers were so low, or that this sorry sum could have weighed one way or the other, we would have been loath " "Enough, sire, enough," said the prince, flushing with vexation. "If the public funds be indeed so backward, Sir William, there is still, I trust, my own private credit, which hath never been drawn upon for my own uses, but is now ready in the cause of a friend in adversity. Go, raise the money upon our own jewels, if naught else may serve, and see that it be paid over to Don Fernando." "In security I offer " cried Don Pedro. "Tush, tush!" said the prince. "I am not a Lombard, sire. Your kingly pledge is my security, without bond or seal. But I have tidings for you, my lords and lieges, that our brother of Lancaster is on his way for our capital, with 400 lances and as many archers to aid us in our venture. When he hath come, and when our fair consort is recovered in her health, which I trust by the grace of God may be ere many weeks be past, we shall then join the army at Dax and set our banners to the breeze once more." A buzz of joy at the prospect of immediate action rose up from the group of warriors. The prince smiled at the martial ardor which shone upon every face around him. "It will hearten you to know," he continued, "that I have sure advices that this Henry is a very valiant leader, and that he has it in his power to make such a stand against us as promises to give us much honor and pleasure. Of his own people he hath brought together, as I learn, some 50,000, with 12,000 of the French free companies, who are, as you know, very valiant and expert men at arms. It is certain also that the brave and worthy Bertrand de Guesclin hath ridden into France to the Duke of Anjou, and purposes to take back with him great levies from Picardy and Brittany. We hold Bertrand in high esteem, for he has oft before been at great pains to furnish us with an honourable encounter. What think you of it, my worthy captal? He took you at Cocherel, and by my soul, you will have the chance now to pay that score." The Gascon warrior winced a little at the allusion, nor were his countrymen around him better pleased, for on the only occasion when they had encountered the arms of France without English aid they had met with a heavy defeat. "There are some who say, sire," said the burly de Clisson, "that the score is already overpaid, for that without Gascon help Bertrand had not been taken at Auray, nor had King John been overborne at Poitiers." "By heaven, but this is too much!" cried an English nobleman. "Methinks that Gascony is too small a cock to crow so lustily." "The smaller cock, my Lord Audley, may have the longer spur," remarked the Captal de Buch. "May have its comb clipped if it makes overmuch noise," broke in an Englishman. "By Our Lady of Rocamadour!" cried the Lord of Mucident, "this is more than I can abide. Sir John Charnell, you shall answer to me for those words.
"Freely, my lord, and when you will," returned the Englishman carelessly. "My Lord de Clisson," cried Lord Audley, "you look somewhat fixedly in my direction. By God's soul, I would be right glad to go further into the matter with you." "And you, my Lord of Pommers," said Sir Nigel, pushing his way to the front. "It is in my mind that we might break a lance in gentle and honourable debate over the question." For a moment a dozen challenges flashed backwards and forwards at this sudden bursting of the cloud which had lowered so long between the knights of the two nations. Furious and gesticulating the Gascons, white and cold and sneering the English, while the prince, with a half smile, glanced from one party to the other, like a man who loved to dwell upon a fiery scene, and yet dreaded lest the mischief go so far that he might find it beyond his control. "Friends, friends," he cried at last, "this quarrel must go no further. The man shall answer to me, be he Gascon or English, who carries it beyond this room. I have overmuch need for your swords that you should turn them upon each other. Sir John Charnell, Lord Audley, you do not doubt the courage of our friends of Gascony?" "Not I, sire," Lord Audley answered. "I have seen them fight too often not to know that they are very hardy and valiant gentlemen." "And so say I," quoth the other Englishman. "But certes there is no fear of our forgetting it while they have a tongue in their heads." "Nay, Sir John," said the prince reprovingly, "all peoples have their own use and customs. But there are some who might call us cold and dull and silent. But you hear, my lords of Gascony, that these gentlemen had no thought to throw a slur upon your honor or your valor. So let all anger fade from your mind. Clisson, Captal, de Pommers, have I your word?" "We are your subjects, sire," said the Gascon barons, though with no very good grace. "Your words are our law." "Then we shall bury all cause of unkindness in a flagon of Malvoisie," said the prince cheerily. "Ho there! The doors of the banquet hall. I have been overlong from my sweet spouse, but I shall be back with you anon. Let the sewers serve and the minstrels play, while we drain a cup to the brave days that are before us in the south." He turned away, accompanied by the two monarchs, while the rest of the company, with many a compressed lip and menacing eye, filed slowly through the side door to the great chamber in which the royal tables were set forth. CHAPTER 20. of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 20. How Alleyn won his place in an honourable guild. Whilst the prince's council was sitting, Alleyn and Ford had remained in the outer hall, where they were soon surrounded by a noisy group of young Englishmen of their own rank, all eager to hear the latest news from England. "How is it with the old man at Windsor?" asked one. "And how with good Queen Philippa?" "And how with Dame Alice Perrers?" cried a third. "Devil take your tongue, what!" shouted a tall young man, seizing the last speaker by the collar and giving him an admonitory shake. "The prince would take your head off for those words." "By God's coif, what would miss it but little?" said another. "It is as empty as a beggar's wallet." "As empty as an English squire, coz," cried the first speaker. "What a devil has become of the maitre d'etable and his sewers? They have not put forth the trestles yet." "Mon Dieu! If a man could eat himself into knighthood, Humphrey, he had been a banneret at the least," observed another, amid a burst of laughter. "And if you could drink yourself in, old leatherhead, you had been first baron of the realm," cried the aggrieved Humphrey. "But how of England, my lads of Loring?" "I take it," said Ford, "that it is much as it was when you were last there, save that perchance there is a little less noise there." "And why less noise, young Solomon?" "Ah, that is for your wit to discover. Pardieu! Here's a paladin come over with the Hampshire mud still sticking to his shoes. He means that the noise is less for our being out of the country." "Very quick in these parts," said Ford, turning to Alleyn. "How are we to take this, sir?" asked the ruffled squire. "You may take it as it comes," said Ford carelessly. "Here is pertness!" cried the other.
"Sir, I honour your truthfulness," said Ford. "Stint it, Humphrey," said the tall squire, with a burst of laughter. "You will have little credit from this gentleman, I perceive. Tongues are sharp in Hampshire, sir." "And swords?" "We may prove that. In 2 days' time is the vepres du tournoi, when we may see if your lance is as quick as your wit." "All very well, Roger Harcomb," cried a burly, bull necked young man, whose square shoulders and massive limbs told of exceptional personal strength. "You pass too lightly over the matter. We are not to be so easily overcrowded. The Lord Loring hath given his proofs, but we know nothing of his squires, save that one of them hath a railing tongue. And how of you, young sir?" bringing his heavy hand down on Alleyne's shoulder. "And what of me, young sir?" "Ma foi, this is my lady's page come over. Your cheek will be browner and your hand harder ere you see your mother again." "If my hand is not hard, it is ready." "Ready? Ready for what? For the hem of my lady's train?" "Ready to chastise insolence, sir," cried Alleyne, with flashing eyes. "Sweet little coz," answered the burly squire. "Such a dainty color, such a mellow voice, eyes of a bashful maid, and hair like a 3 years' babe. Voila!" He passed his thick fingers roughly through the youth's crisp golden curls. "You seek to force a quarrel, sir," said the young man, white with anger. "And then what?" "Why, you do it like a country boor, and not like a gentle squire. Hast been ill bred and as ill taught. I serve a master who could show you how such things should be done." "And how would he do it, O pink of squires?" "He would neither be loud nor would he be unmannerly, but rather more gentle than is his wont. He would say, 'Sir, I should take it as an honor to do some small deed of arms against you, not for mine own glory or advancement, but rather for the fame of my lady and for the upholding of chivalry.' Then he would draw his glove thus and throw it on the ground, or, if he had cause to think that he had to deal with a churl, he might throw it in his face, as I do now." A buzz of excitement went up from the knot of squires as Alleyne, his gentle nature turned by this causeless attack into fiery resolution, dashed his glove with all his strength into the sneering face of his antagonist. From all parts of the hall squires and pages came running, until a dense swaying crowd surrounded the disputants.
"Your life for this?"
said the bully, with a face which was distorted with rage. "If you can take it," returned Alleyne.
"Good lad," whispered Ford. "Stick to it close as wax."
"I shall see justice," cried Norbury, Sir Oliver's silent attendant. "You brought it upon yourself, John Tranter," said the tall squire, who had been addressed as Roger Harcomb. "You must ever plague the newcomers, but it were shame if this went further. The lad hath shown a proper spirit." "But a blow, a blow!" cried several of the older squires. "There must be a finish to this." "Nay, Tranter first laid hand upon his head," said Harcomb. "How say you, Tranter? The matter may rest where it stands." "My name is known in these parts," said Tranter proudly. "I can let pass what might leave a stain upon another. Let him pick up his glove and say that he has done amiss."
"I would see him in the claws of the devil first," whispered Ford.
"You hear, young sir," said the peacemaker. "Our friend will overlook the matter if you do but say you have acted in heat and haste." "I cannot say that," answered Alleyne. "It is our custom, young sir, when new squires come amongst us from England, to test them in some such way. Bethink you that if a man have a destrier or a new lance he will ever try it in time of peace, lest in days of need it may fail him. How much more then is it proper to test those who are our comrades in arms?"
"I would draw out, if it may honorably be done," murmured Norbury in Alleyne's ear. "The man is a noted swordsman, and far above your strength."
Edricson came, however, of that sturdy Saxon blood which is very slowly heated, but once up, not easily to be cooled. The hint of danger which Norbury threw out was the one thing needed to harden his resolution. "I came here at the back of my master," he said, "and I looked on every man here as an Englishman and a friend. This gentleman has shown me a rough welcome, and if I have answered him in the same spirit he has but himself to thank. I will pick the glove up, but certes I shall abide what I have done unless he first crave my pardon for what he hath said and done." Tranter shrugged his shoulders.
"You have done what you could to save him, Harcomb," said he. "We had best settle at once."
"So say I," cried Alleyne. "The council will not break up until the banquet," remarked a gray haired squire. "You have a clear 2 hours." "And the place?" "The tilting yard is empty at this hour." "Nay, it must not be within the grounds of the court, or it may go hard with all concerned if it come to the ears of the prince." "But there is a quiet spot near the river," said one youth. "We have but to pass through the abbey grounds, along the armory wall, past the church of St. Remy, and so down the Rue des Apotres." "En avant, then!" cried Tranter shortly, and the whole assembly flocked out into the open air, save only those whom the special orders of their masters held to their posts. These unfortunates crowded to the small casements, and craned their necks after the throng as far as they could catch a glimpse of them. Close to the banks of the Garonne there lay a little tract of green sward, with the high wall of a prior's garden upon one side, and an orchard with a thick bristle of leafless apple trees upon the other. The river ran deep and swift up to the steep bank, but there were few boats upon it, and the ships were moored far out into the centre of the stream. Here the two combatants drew their swords and threw off their doublets, for neither had any defensive armor. The duello, with its stately etiquette, had not yet come into vogue, but rough and sudden encounters were as common as they must ever be when hot headed youth goes abroad with a weapon strapped to its waist. In such combats, as well as in the more formal sports of the tilting yard, Tranter had won a name for strength and dexterity which had caused Norbury to utter his well meant warning. On the other hand, Alleyne had used his weapons in constant exercise and practice for every day for many months, and being by nature quick of eye and prompt of hand, he might pass now as no mean swordsman. A strangely opposed pair they appeared as they approached each other. Tranter dark and stout and stiff, with hairy chest and corded arms; Alleyne a model of comeliness and grace, with his golden hair and his skin as fair as a woman's. An unequal fight it seemed to most, but there were a few, and they the most experienced, who saw something in the youth's steady gray eye and wary step which left the issue open to doubt. "Hold, sirs, hold!" cried Norbury, ere a blow had been struck. "This gentleman hath a 2-handed sword a good foot longer than that of our friend." "Take mine, Alleyne," said Ford. "Nay, friends," he answered, "I understand the weight and balance of mine own. To work, sir, for our lord may need us at the abbey." Tranter's great sword was indeed a mighty vantage in his favor. He stood with his feet close together, his knees bent outwards, ready for a dash inwards or a spring out. The weapon he held straight up in front of him with blade erect, so that he might either bring it down with a swinging blow, or by a turn of the heavy blade he might guard his own head and body. A further protection lay in the broad and powerful guard which crossed the hilt, and which was furnished with a deep and narrow notch, in which an expert swordsman might catch his foeman's blade, and by a quick turn of his wrist might snap it across. Alleyne, on the other hand, must trust for his defence to his quick eye and active foot, for his sword, though as keen as a whetstone could make it, was of a light and graceful build, with a narrow sloping pommel and a tapering steel. Tranter well knew his advantage, and lost no time in putting it to use. As his opponent walked towards him he suddenly bounded forward and sent in a whistling cut which would have severed the other in twain had he not sprung lightly back from it. So close was it that the point ripped a gash in the jutting edge of his linen cyclas. Quick as a panther, Alleyne sprung in with a thrust, but Tranter, who was as active as he was strong, had already recovered himself and turned it aside with a movement of his heavy blade. Again he whizzed in a blow which made the spectators hold their breath, and Alleyne again very quickly and swiftly slipped from under it, and sent back 2 lightning thrusts which the other could scarcely parry. So close were they to each other that Alleyne had no time to spring back from the next cut, which beat down his sword and grazed his forehead, sending the blood streaming into his eyes and down his cheeks. He sprang out beyond sword sweep, and the pair stood breathing heavily, while a crowd of young squires buzzed their applause. "Bravely struck on both sides!" cried Roger Harcomb. "You have both won honor from this meeting, and it would be sin and shame to let it go further." "You have done enough, Edricson," said Norbury. "You have carried yourself well," cried several of the older squires. "For my part, I have no wish to slay this young man," said Tranter, wiping his heated brow. "Does this gentleman crave my pardon for having used me despitefully?" asked Alleyne.
"Nay, not I."
"Then stand on your guard, sir." With a clatter and dash the two blades met once more, Alleyne pressing in so as to keep within the full sweep of the heavy blade, while Tranter as continually sprang back to have more space for one of his fatal cuts. A 3 parts parried blow drew blood from Alleyne's left shoulder, but at the same moment he wounded Tranter slightly upon the thigh. Next instant, however, his blade had slipped into the fatal notch, and there was a sharp cracking sound with a tinkling upon the ground, and he found a splintered piece of steel 15 inches long was all that remained to him of his weapon.
"Your life is in my hands," cried Tranter with a bitter smile.
"Nay, nay, he makes submission," broke in several squires.
"Another sword!" cried Ford.
"Nay, sir," said Harcomb, "that is not our custom."
"Throw down your hilt, Edricson," cried Norbury.
"Never," said Alleyne.
"Do you crave my pardon, sir?"
"You are mad to ask it."
"Then on guard again!"
cried the young squire, and sprang in with a fire and a fury which more than made up for the shortness of his weapon. It had not escaped him that his opponent was breathing in short hoarse gasps, like a man who is dizzy with fatigue. Now was the time for the purer living and the more agile limb to show their value. Back and back gave Tranter, ever seeking time for a last cut. On and on came Alleyne, his jagged point now at his foeman's face, now at his throat, now at his chest, still stabbing and thrusting to pass the line of steel which covered him. Yet his experienced foeman knew well that such efforts could not be long sustained. Let him relax for one instant and his death blow had come. Relax he must. Flesh and blood could not stand the strain. Already the thrusts were less fierce, the foot less ready, although there was no abatement of the spirit in the steady gray eyes. Tranter, cunning and wary from years of fighting, knew that his chance had come. He brushed aside the frail weapon which was opposed to him, whirled up his great blade, sprang back to get a fairer sweep, and vanished into the waters of the Garonne. So intent had the squires, both combatants and spectators, been on the matter in hand, that all thought of the steep bank and swift still stream had gone from their minds. It was not until Tranter, giving back before the other's fiery rush, was upon the very brink, that a general cry warned him of his danger. That last spring, which he hoped would have brought the fight to a bloody end, carried him clear of the edge, and he found himself in an instant 8 feet deep in the ice cold stream. Once and twice his gasping face and clutching fingers broke up through the still green water, sweeping outwards in the swirl of the current. In vain were sword sheaths, apple branches, and belts linked together thrown out to him by his companions. Alleyne had dropped his shattered sword and was standing, trembling in every limb, with his rage all changed in an instant to pity. For the third time the drowning man came to the surface, his hands full of green slimy water plants, his eyes turned in despair to the shore. Their glance fell upon Alleyne, and he could not withstand the mute appeal which he read in them. In an instant he too was in the Garonne, striking out with powerful strokes for his late foeman. Yet the current was swift and strong, and good swimmer as he was, it was no easy task which Alleyne had set himself. To clutch at Tranter and to seize him by the hair was the work of a few seconds, but to hold his head above water and to make their way out of the current was another matter. For 100 strokes he did not seem to gain an inch. Then at last, amid a shout of joy and praise from the bank, they slowly drew clear into more stagnant water. At that instant a rope made of a dozen sword belts linked together by the buckles was thrown by Ford into their very hands. 3 pulls from eager arms, and the two combatants, dripping and pale, were dragged up the bank and lay panting upon the grass. John Tranter was the first to come to himself, for although he had been longer in the water, he had done nothing during that fierce battle with the current. He staggered to his feet and looked down upon his rescuer, who had raised himself upon his elbow and was smiling faintly at the buzz of congratulation and of praise which broke from the squires around him.
"I am much beholden to you, sir," said Tranter,
though in no very friendly voice.
"Certes, I should have been in the river now but for you, for I was born in Warwickshire, which is but a dry county, and there are few who swim in those parts."
"I ask no thanks," Alleyne answered shortly. "Give me your hand to rise, Ford."
"The river has been my enemy," said Tranter, "but it hath been a good friend to you, for it has saved your life this day."
"That is as it may be," returned Alleyne. "But all is now well over," quoth Harcomb, "and no scath come of it, which is more than I had at one time hoped for. Our young friend here hath very fairly and honestly earned his right to be a craftsman of the honourable guild of the squires of Bordeaux. Here is your doublet, tranter." "Alas for my poor sword, which lies at the bottom of the Garonne!" said the squire. "Here is your pourpoint, Edricson," cried Norbury. "Throw it over your shoulders, that you may have at least one dry garment." "And now back to the abbey," said several. "One moment, sirs," cried Alleyne, who was leaning on Ford's shoulder with the broken sword which he had picked up still clutched in his right hand. "My ears may be somewhat dulled by the water, and perchance what has been said has escaped me, but I have not yet heard this gentleman crave pardon for the insults which he put upon me in the hall." "What, do you still pursue the quarrel?" asked Tranter. "And why not, sir? I am slow to take up such things, but once afoot I shall follow it while I have life or breath." "Ma foi! you have not too much of either, for you are as white as marble," said Harcomb bluntly. "Take my rede, sir, and let it drop, for you have come very well out of it." "Nay," said Alleyne, "this quarrel is none of my making, but now that I am here I swear to you that I shall never leave this spot until I have that which I have come for. So ask my pardon, sir, or choose another glaive and to it again." The young squire was deadly white from his exertions, both on the land and in the water. Soaking and strained, with a smear of blood on his white shoulder and another on his brow, there was still in his whole pose and set of face the trace of an inflexible resolution. His opponent's duller and more material mind quailed before the fire and intensity of a higher spiritual nature. "I had not thought you had taken it so amiss," said he awkwardly. "It was but such a jest as we play upon each other, and if you must have it so, I am sorry for it." "Then I am sorry too," quoth Alleyne warmly, "and here is my hand upon it." "And the none meat horn has blown 3 times," quoth Harcomb, as they all streamed in chattering groups from the ground. "I know not what the prince's maitre de cuisine will say or think. By my troth, Master Ford, your friend here is in need of a cup of wine, for he hath drunk deeply of Garonne water. I had not thought from his fair face that he had stood to this matter so shrewdly." "Faith," said Ford, "this air of Bordeaux hath turned our turtle dove into a gamecock. A milder or more courteous youth never came out of Hampshire." "His master also, as I understand, is a very mild and courteous gentleman," remarked Harcomb. "Yet I do not think that they are either of them men with whom it is very safe to trifle." CHAPTER 21.